I want to tell you something my wife used to say. She said the most dangerous thing a person can do is underestimate a quiet man. She told me that on our third date, sitting across from me at a diner booth in 1979. And I laughed because I was 26 years old and I didn't know yet how right she was. I know now. I know now because 43 years later, in a hospital recovery room with a catheter in my arm and a fresh scar down the center of my chest, I found out that her wisdom had reached beyond her own death and protected me in a way I never could have predicted. My name is Roy. I'm 64 years old. I spent 38 years working as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company in the Midwest. I'm not rich. I'm not connected. I'm not powerful in any way that would be obvious to a person looking at me. I drive a 7-year-old pickup truck. I wear the same 3 pairs of jeans on rotation. I mow my own yard and I cook my own meals, and I go to bed at 10:30 most nights, because there's no one left to stay up talking to. My wife's name was Lorraine. She died 22 months before this story begins. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is how that disease works. It gives you just enough time to say goodbye and not nearly enough time to accept it. We had 40 years together. No children of our own. A good life. A real life. The kind that doesn't look impressive from the outside but feels irreplaceable from the inside. What I haven't told you yet, what almost no one knew, is what Lorraine did for the first 15 years of her adult life before she married me. She was a certified estate jeweler. She worked for an auction house in Chicago, appraising collections for estate sales and probate proceedings. She had a gift for it. A real gift. She could look at a piece of jewelry the way a doctor looks. At an X-ray, she saw things other people missed. She knew cuts, settings, hallmarks, provenance. She knew what things were worth and, more importantly, she knew how to prove it. When she retired from that work, she brought that expertise home with her. Over the next 4 decades, she built a collection. Not extravagantly, she wasn't that kind of woman, but carefully, purposefully, one piece at a time. Estate sales, small auctions, private sellers who didn't always know what they had. She had an eye, and she never stopped using it. By the time she was diagnosed, the collection in the velvet-lined cedar chest in our bedroom had been professionally appraised at just under $74,000. Every piece photographed against a white background. Every appraisal certificate filed in a manila folder inside a fire-rated safe in my home office. Every piece listed on a rider on our homeowner's insurance policy. She organized it all herself. In the last weeks of her life, when she still had the clarity to do it, she sat at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and her coffee going cold beside her, and she made sure every piece had a paper trail. I asked her once why she was spending her energy on that instead of resting. She looked at me over those glasses and said, "Roy, I need to know you'll be taken care of when I'm gone." I didn't understand what she meant. I think part of me understands now that maybe she did. I want to be clear about something before I continue. My son Marcus is not a bad man. He's a weak man, which is a different thing. And I've spent 2 years trying to decide which is worse. He's 41 years old. He works in pharmaceutical sales. He married a woman named Dina 7 years ago. And the kindest true thing I can say about Dina is that she is relentlessly focused on what things are worth. Not emotionally, financially. She's the kind of person who, when you tell her about a trip you took, asks how much it cost before she asks if you had a good time. I never loved her. I tried to. For Marcus's sake, I genuinely tried. But there was something underneath all her politeness, a calculation. A constant assessment that made me feel like I was being inventoried every time she looked at me. Lorraine felt it too. She never said anything unkind about Dina. But in the last months of her life, she started making comments. Small ones. Nothing I could have pointed to at the time. Things like, make sure you change the name on the safe deposit box account. Roy, make sure you know where all the certificates are. Make sure you have copies. I thought she was just being thorough. She was always thorough. It was one of the things I loved most about her. 8 months after Lorraine died, I was diagnosed with coronary artery disease. 3 blockages. My cardiologist used the phrase, time-sensitive, in a way that made it very clear what the alternative to surgery looked like. I was scheduled for a triple bypass. The procedure went well. By all accounts. Though I wasn't conscious for any of it. What I was, for approximately 11 hours, was completely and utterly unavailable. Marcus and Denna offered to stay at the house while I was in surgery. To water the plants, they said. To keep an eye on things. I said yes because I was 63 years old and scared. And because they were my family. And because I didn't have a reason not to. At least not a reason I could name. I came out of surgery on a Thursday afternoon. I was in recovery for 2 days before I could hold a real conversation. When I got home 5 days later, using a walker and moving like a man who'd had his chest cracked open because I had, I sat down in my recliner and I looked across the room at the shelf near the fireplace. The shelf where Lorraine kept a few of her favorite pieces displayed in glass boxes. The shelf that had been her small corner of the living room for 15 years. It was empty. I told myself I was confused. That's the first thing you tell yourself when you see something that shouldn't be possible. You question your own memory before you question someone else's honesty. I got up, slowly, and I walked to the bedroom. The cedar chest was still there. It was also empty. The velvet lining was still inside. Those little indentations where each piece used to rest, like small shadows of things that were no longer there. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I went to my home office. The file drawer was intact. The safe was locked. The insurance rider was right where it should be. I sat in my office chair, and I thought about what to do next. I want you to understand something about the kind of man I am. I spent 38 years as a claims adjuster. My entire professional life was about documentation, about evidence, about the difference between what someone said happened and what actually happened. I was good at my job because I learned early that emotion is the enemy of accuracy. When you're emotional, you make accusations you can't prove. You say things that warn people. You give them time to construct a story. I had learned over and over again that the best thing to do when you suspect something is to say nothing. Document everything. And let the facts do the talking. So I didn't call Marcus. Not that day. I called Gerald instead. Gerard Bauer. He was my boss for 19 years at the insurance company and my closest friend for 40. He's also a licensed public adjuster and the most methodical man I've ever known outside of myself. I told him what I'd found. Or rather, what I hadn't found. He asked me 2 questions. Is the insurance rider current? And do you have the appraisal certificates? I said yes to both. He said, "Good. Don't touch anything. I'm coming over tomorrow." Gerald arrived the next morning with a legal pad and a camera. We went through the house room by room. He documented the empty display shelf. He photographed the cedar chest and its empty velvet interior. He cross-referenced the insurance rider against the list of missing pieces. By noon, we had a complete accounting, 41 pieces, valued at a combined $73,850. Gone. Not misplaced. Gone. Gerald set down his legal pad and looked at me. I said nothing. He said, "Roy, this isn't a burglary. There are no signs of forced entry. Nothing else in the house was touched. This was targeted. Someone who knew where to look." I said I knew that. He said, "Do you want to call your son? Or do you want to call Herb Caston first?" Herb Caston is an attorney I had used years ago for some estate planning. Gerald knew him too. They'd gone to college together. I said I'd call Herb. Here's the part that surprised me. And I don't surprise easily. When Herb picked up and I explained what I'd found, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Roy, funny you should call. I had a woman call my office 3 days ago. She said she was clearing out some estate items on behalf of a family member. She wanted to know the legal exposure, hypothetically, for selling personal property from a home where she had been given temporary access. I asked who referred her, and she hung up." He paused. Then he said, "I didn't put it together until just now. But the timing and the fact that the name she gave matched someone connected to your account, I think you need to come in." I drove to Herb's office the next morning. He had already pulled a few things. Dana, as it turned out, had sold the jewelry in 4 separate transactions, across 3 different pawn shops and 1 estate resale consignment store. Over the 5 days I was hospitalized and recovering, she'd gotten a combined total of $820. $820 for $73,850 worth of professionally appraised, individually insured, photographically documented jewelry. She sold Lorraine's pieces for $820. I sat in that office chair and I didn't say anything for a while. Herb let me sit. He's known me long enough to know when I need a minute. When I finally looked up, I said, "How exposed is she?" He said, "Roy, she walked into pawn shops with stolen property and signed her name on the receipts. And that property happens to be on an active insurance policy with documented provenance." He paused. "I'd say she's extremely exposed. If you enjoy real drama stories like this, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from." The question I had to answer next was what to do about Marcus. Because whatever Dana had done, she'd done it while my son stood by. Maybe he hadn't known beforehand. Maybe he hadn't participated directly. But he had been in that house. And he hadn't called me. He hadn't said a word. I thought about that for 4 days. I drove past my own house twice before I went inside. Just thinking. Then I called Marcus. I kept my voice neutral. I asked how things were going. He said fine. I asked about Dana. He said she was good. I said I'd noticed some things were missing from the house when I got back. Long pause. He said, "What things?" I said some of your mother's jewelry. He said, "Oh, just, oh." That "oh" told me everything I needed to know about what he knew. I said I'd called the insurance company and they were looking into it. Which was true. Gerald had already filed a claim on my behalf, citing the complete appraisal documentation and photographic evidence. The insurance company had assigned their own investigator. What I didn't tell Marcus was that Herb had already contacted 2 of the 3 pawn shops, both of which had Dana's signed receipts, and that one of them, the one where she'd sold Lorraine's engagement ring for $280, had already provided security footage. Another pause on the line. Marcus said, "Dad, I think maybe Dana thought those were." He stopped. He tried again. She thought they were old pieces, not valuable. He was trying to build her a story in real time, and he didn't have enough material to work with. I said, "Marcus, your mother was a certified estate jeweler for 15 years. She appraised her own collection professionally in 2019 and again in 2021. The current rider on my insurance policy lists 41 pieces at a total appraised value of $73,850. Every piece has been photographed, documented, and insured. Your wife sold them for $820 across 4 separate transactions and signed her name on the receipts. The pawn shops have security footage. The insurance investigator has the documentation, and Herb Caston has been retained. Silence. Real silence. The kind where you can feel a person on the other end of the line, understanding, piece by piece, what they are standing in the middle of. I said, I'm not going to ask you what you knew or when you knew it. That's not my job. That's a question you're going to have to live with. What I'm telling you is what is already in motion. So you are not surprised when it arrives at your door. Because it is coming. Marcus. And it is coming because your mother built it. I hung up. What would you have done in that moment? If it were your son, if it were your flesh and blood standing next to the person who desecrated your dead wife's memory for $820, would you have said what I said, or would you have said more? I've asked myself that more times than I can count. The insurance claim was settled in my favor 6 weeks later. The company paid out the full appraised value of all 41 pieces, minus my deductible. The pawn shops cooperated fully because they had no reason not to. They were victims of the same fraud in a different direction. They'd been sold stolen property at a fraction of its value, and they weren't happy about it either. 2 of the shops were able to locate and return the pieces intact. One of them, the one that had Lorraine's engagement ring, had already resold it. That one still breaks something in me when I think about it. But the money came back. The insurance company referred the matter to law enforcement. That's standard procedure when documented fraud of that magnitude is involved. What happened next was not something I controlled or directed. The police contacted Dana. She retained an attorney. There were negotiations. In the end, she was charged with receiving stolen property and fraud. Pleaded to a lesser charge. Paid restitution, a portion of which came from Marcus's savings. Because their finances are shared and received 3 years of probation, Marcus called me once during all of this. He said, "Dad, I didn't know she was going to do that." I said, "I believe you. Marcus, what I need you to think about is what it means that you didn't know. What it means about who you chose to build a life with. What it means about how little she thought of your mother, and how little she thought of you. To do something like that in your name." He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need him to. Some things you have to sit with until they become something you can carry. I want to tell you what happened with the engagement ring. The one that had already been resold? The estate resale shop had sold it to a woman who collected Victorian jewelry. She was in her 50s. Lived about 40 minutes from me. When the police contacted her as part of the investigation, she was horrified. She called me directly. A few days after they spoke with her, she said she had no idea it was stolen. She said she was sorry. She said she could see from the documentation I'd submitted to the insurance company that it had meant something. She drove to my house and she gave it back to me. She wouldn't take any payment. She just said, "This ring has a story. It deserves to be with someone who knows what it is." I put it in the cedar chest. All the recovered pieces went back into the cedar chest. The ones I got back through the insurance settlement, I had professionally reset or repaired where needed. The chest is in my bedroom again, where it belongs. The velvet is new, replaced by a woman at a local tailor's shop who did it without asking too many questions. If you like stories like this, stories about grief and dignity and the kind of justice that takes time alike, really helps the channel grow. I still think about Lorraine's comment, the one she made in those last weeks, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold. "Make sure you know where all the certificates are. Roy, make sure you have copies." She was meticulous her entire life. She was meticulous about the things she loved. And in the end, the thing she was most meticulous about was making sure that those things would be protected when she was no longer here to protect them herself. She didn't know what was coming. She couldn't have. But she knew the world well enough to know that love, by itself, is not a defense against the people who mistake grief for weakness. She prepared anyway, because that's who she was. I spend a lot of time in my house these days. It's quieter than I'd like. I eat my dinner in front of the television more nights than not. And I go to bed at 10:30. And I wake up at 6 and make coffee for 1. But when I walk through that bedroom and I see the cedar chest, I feel something I didn't expect to feel after everything that happened. I feel close to her. I feel like she's still looking out for me. Like she saw this coming from somewhere I couldn't reach, and she did what she always did. She prepared. The most dangerous thing a person can do is underestimate a quiet man. That's what she told me on our third date, 54 years ago, at a diner in Milnucent, Setantanu. I've been a quiet man my whole life. I sat through surgeries and grief and betrayal, and I said less than anyone expected, and I let the paperwork do the talking. She was right. She was almost always right, and I'd give anything every piece of that collection. Every appraisal certificate. Every dollar the insurance company ever paid me to have her sitting across from me again. Coffee going cold. Glasses on. Telling me something true. I don't get that. But I got this. I got to tell this story. And I think, somehow, that's what she would have wanted.